Hello everyone, I'm Daniel from Hellbeam Design, and in this video I will show you step by step how to make this beautiful end grain cutting board, as well as how to make your own cutting board wax, all with very simple tools. This build is perfect for you who want to satisfy your primal urge to build something really nice. Welcome. I will build this cutting board out of pine and Titebond 3, which is a food safe glue. I spread the glue on the wood and put them in place, to then be able to press them together with clamps. I have to do this twice, as we're going to build a fairly large cutting board. I wipe off the remaining glue with a damp cloth, and then use the large clamps. And when I've done this twice, I have two large pieces that I also join together in the same way. Anyone can do this. The end result of this cutting board versus a mass-produced one is huge. I'm just a guy with a YouTube channel, but I dare to say that this cutting board will have a lifetime warranty. The most important thing in this step is to make sure that the pieces stay as straight as possible. This means that we don't have to remove so much material at a later stage. I clamp both edges with some extra offcuts to make it as straight as possible. And now we're going to make our very own flattening jig. This will be made with the OSB board and some studs. We begin by laying out the foundation for the plate and for the sled. Then we measure out and saw the rails that the sled will run on. I am very happy with this DeWalt saw. Previously I had a Ryobi saw and a Skill saw. Not a real skill saw, but the Skill brand. Buy yourself a good miter saw, you deserve it. When we have the rails sawn, I glue them on with Titebond 3. Because I want them to stay as stable as possible. In addition to glue, I will also use wood screws. I screw in 5 screws per side. Then I place the cutting board between the rails to make sure it fits. Then we're gonna start creating the sled. First we create the fences for our router, so it will be easy to keep it in the right place. The easiest way is to put the router on top and then lay out the fence. It doesn't have to be a tight fit, this is just a simple fence. I attached these fences with 4 wood screws per side. When we have made the fence, we make the stops that prevents the sled from sliding off the rails. Well-made or expensive tools can make you more efficient, but creative thinking and a few common tools might be and can be enough. And when the stops are in place, we put the router back in place so that we can measure where the stops need to be on the sides. And finally, it's time to route the cutout. To make this cutting board, I've ordered these from CMT Tools, where one is made to flatten material and the other one is to create the so-called use groove, which prevents liquid from running down the sides of the cutting board. And now we can start flattening the cutting board. This creates a lot of sawdust, so have cleaning supplies available. Or buy yourself a really good sawdust extractor. Before we flatten the cutting board on the other side, we remove as much sawdust as possible. This can otherwise make it very uneven. Then, when we have flattened both sides, we pull out the sander. In the beginning I use my angle grinder with 80 grit sandpaper to remove all the rough grooves and edges. Then I switch to my sander with 120 grit sandpaper. When the board is flat, it's time to saw it down again. As a base I use styrofoam, which is a good sacrificial board and it holds the material in place. Instead of sawing this on a table saw, I will use a cheap circular saw. It is very important that the first cut is completely 90 degrees and straight. This makes everything much easier down the line. When the first cut is completed, we check that it is good enough with a piece of straight steel. Then we attach a stop to the circular saw. I set it to 45mm by measuring with a speed square. I want to make this a fairly thick cutting board. Then I locked the stop, then I saw the cutting board in several parts so we can make an end grain cutting board. The pieces are now quite rough, so I sand them down so that they will be easy to glue together without gaps. Now it's time for the final glue up. I have laid out the pieces in a pattern I want, and I'm preparing for the final gluing. Note that right now it's -4 Celsius, which means that immediately after gluing this I will have to bring the piece into the heat for it to harden. 48 hours later the glue has hardened and it's time to flatten it for the last time. To stabilize the cutting board I apply hot glue. This glue hardens very quickly and it is enough to hold everything in place while I flatten it. To remove the cutting board from the jig, a chisel and a rubber hammer is perfect. Don't forget to remove the sawdust before putting the cutting board back down again for the last flattening. Now it's time for the sanding. This is by far the longest part of this job. I estimate that I've sanded this board for at least 3 hours in total. And of course I include some action with the chisel. This is very satisfying for me, and I really don't know why. I start the sanding again with the angle grinder with 80 grit sandpaper to remove all the grooves and edges until it's flat enough to make some 45-degree edges with my router. To plug a hole that has been created, I fill it with wood glue and stick in a piece of wood and some sawdust. This will basically be invisible later in the process. Then I mark with a pencil so I know where to sand. I sand the board now up to 180 grit. A good sander is critical for this type of build. If you don't have a sander, buy yourself a corded sander, not a better one. Then it is time for us to create the use groove around the entire cutting board. Make it a habit to always do a test lap before doing the real one to make sure all the settings are correct. In the best case, you can build a jig to make a use groove to ensure that everything is perfect. For the sake of it, I will do this freehand with a stop on the router. Be extra careful with the corners. The sanding of the use grooves is done by hand. The corners will take a very long time to get good. The last sanding I do with a 220 grit sandpaper, then I do a water pop, and then I do the final lap with 220 grit sandpaper. To create your own board wax, you need cold pressed linseed oil and beeswax, as well as a pan of water and a bowl to put the ingredients in. The beeswax comes in flakes, and then you mix the two ingredients in the bowl. The purpose of having water in the pan underneath is that there must be a slow heating of the ingredients. When we have poured in the ingredients, we start the hot plate on medium heat. You can experiment with a mixture if you want a softer or harder wax. I prefer this one. I recommend stirring this with something made of metal, as this is easier to clean later. Quite quickly, the wax dissolves in the linseed oil, and immediately when it's ready, we remove it from the hot plate and start pouring the liquid into our cans. I recommend buying cans like these. These are made of aluminum. These are very cheap and easy to work with. I'm filling these to the brim. The wax will shrink a little bit during cooling. When the wax has cooled down, you can put the lids on and put them away. These are great gifts to give away, especially if you build someone a cutting board or if you buy someone a cutting board. Just give this with the cutting board. If you learned something and watched this video so far, I think you should subscribe to my channel. My goal with this is to show you that you don't need expensive tools to create nice things. I will continue to make more videos, and I have some really fun projects in the works for you guys. More on that later in this video. I check the dryness of the cutting board to ensure that it is ready to be oiled. I oil the board with cold press linseed oil. It is important that the board really absorbs as much oil as possible. This is the most satisfying thing about this build. Now you get to see your product come to life. Oil in the board in batches and allow it to dry about half an hour between each oiling. When the oiling is complete, let it dry for at least 24 hours before starting the next step. Then it is time to put on a pair of non-slip legs on the cutting board. First I lay out the legs where I want them and I mark where to drill the holes. A pair of non-slip legs quickly make this cutting board premium. It also creates some air circulation around the board. A little bit off topic, but you know that products for men are often given strange names to appeal to men. Names such as Storm Killer for a shampoo or Warrior Paint for face cream. Now it's time to wax the board with our homemade board wax. You can do this with a cloth or with your hands. This will make the board waterproof and very easy to clean. A protective layer is also formed around it, which means that it will last longer. The first application, cover the entire board with a thin layer, then remove any excess with a paper towel. A very beautiful surface will be created on the cutting board, as you can see here with my light. Then it's time to attach the legs. Use a screw that has a pretty large head to ensure that the legs cannot detach from the cutting board later. Thick cutting boards make me very happy. This cutting board is going to a client who likes to cook very tasty food. And here comes the bonus tip. To easily explain why you need an end grain cutting board instead of a long grain cutting board, I will use a brush. When you make a cut on a long grain cutting board, you slowly cut off the wooden fibers, whereas if you have an end grain cutting board, the knife only goes in between the wooden fibers without damaging them. To all of you who are now thinking about whether to build a cutting board, I say to you, just do it. This project is time consuming but comes with a really high reward, regardless of whether you use it yourself or choose to sell it. The recipient will be very satisfied. My price for a board like this is about $400 and it comes with a lifetime warranty. If you want the chance to name a product, put a name suggestion in the comments. I will choose a name with humor. If you want the chance to win something from my upcoming giveaway, subscribe to this channel and follow me on Instagram as more details are coming soon. And now, a short teaser for one of my next videos. Thank you for watching. Bye.